Well, howdy everyone. We've got a minute or two before we get going, so I'll wait just a little bit. Whilst we're doing that, does anybody have any questions, logistical things, housekeeping stuff before we get started?
Yes, I had a question.
Dev.
Will you have office hours tomorrow, even though it's going to be a dead day?
Let me take a look. I will be in my office here from 8:30 until 11. Let me actually just block that off, so I'm going to make sure that I'm here. So from 8:30 till 11, then I've got some commitments until about 1:30. And I'm mobile in the afternoon, but I can certainly do something on a call-in basis if someone needed a chat in the afternoon. But anytime up until 11 tomorrow would be really good.
And just add on to that, are you doing office hours over the weekend or during finals week?
So this weekend is a little trickier for me. So what I can do is I can set up some very specific appointments if need be. But again, I'm going to be mobile. I'm heading down to Houston for a family event over the weekend. Monday, totally, I mean, the earlier next week, totally available. I've got other commitments like in another class, I've got an exam on Tuesday morning, stuff like that. But let me take a look at the calendar here real quick. So the exam's next Thursday. Wednesday is pretty wide open. Tuesday is totally wide open. Monday looks really good. Yeah, next week looks really good. Besides all that pesky stuff like grading, but it looks pretty good.
If we've coordinated a time, if we're seniors, to take the exam with you, will you just like open it up at the time we discussed, or how does that work?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sally. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a second here. So if I don't answer your question, but I've got, so for example, I've got you down at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, but I'll explain how that'll work here in a sec. Most people are here. See how many graduating. I'm just taking a quick look as to how many graduating seniors I have. Let's see. Okay, I am, let's see, everybody. Yeah, I think we're good. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So a couple of things today. This is obviously our last get together. So I want to do a few things. Let me talk about the study guide quick. I think I've got that up on the screen share if everyone can see that. So I'd like to talk about that. I'll talk about the final exam, make some comments. I just refer to the question that Sally just asked about graduating seniors. Then once we've got that out of the way and the kind of housekeeping is done, then I'm going to, I'll wrap it up, right? We'll do a, I don't know, not very long, 20, maybe 30 minutes tops wrap up. Some few things I'd like to say at the end. So some logistical things. First of all, the exam. So of course the exam is on the 6th, right? It's on Thursday. And as I've said, even though the university has set this exam time, right? And they give all final exams a window of 2.5 hours for that. The exam is, and the reason why they do that is for cumulative finals and things like that. So this final, of course, is not cumulative, and it's a normal exam. It'll be just a little bit longer than the other two because we've got a little bit more material to cover. And so what I'm estimating here is, instead of it being a 50-minute exam, I've estimated that it's going to be a 60-minute exam, and then I've just simply added half an hour on top of that, right? So you're going to have plenty of time to take this final exam, and then for those who have added time, I've added that on top of it, right? So time should be of no concern in getting this exam done. It's the same structure as last time. It's a series of short answers, multiple choice type questions, and then at the end I've got several written questions, and then they're along the same lines as the previous ones, right? Short, worth 2, 3, or 5 marks. The material starts from the carbon cycle onwards, so I'm not going to examine anything with the greenhouse effect or selective gases. We looked at that in exam number 2, but from the carbon cycle onwards. And I'm just going to point out, I did this last time, I've done this for both exams. Let me point out some key things here on the study guide. I'm not going to go through it line by line. And these key things are not the only things you need to know for sure, but I'm just going to point out some important ones, right? So for example, carbon dioxide versus carbon and how we express both. We talked about that, and that's explained in the book, right? So that's important. I said that diagram on the latitudinal diversity gradient is critical, and what plays into that as well is how that gradient map is modified by mountains, right? You need to know what a hotspot is and how we define a hotspot, so that's important, okay? You certainly need to understand the drivers of deforestation, so who's doing it and why they're doing it, and why the herringbone pattern is more destructive than the edge effects. You need to know those 6 soil horizons that we talked about. You need to know this very simple, straightforward way of looking at soil loss versus soil formation, okay? You need to understand the basics of the nitrogen cycle. And those are the big ones, right? Those are some of the big ones that would certainly lend themselves to short answer type questions, right? But everything else on this study guide would also be important and be part of the final. So let me stop there and see if there are any specific questions. Okay, one sec, I just see the chat going, so give me a minute to pull that up. Tammy's question, can we go back and forth between questions this time in the exam? Unfortunately, I'm going to stick with the same one, Tammy. I've had that question before. I tried that in one of the previous semesters, and the grades were dramatically inflated. So I'm going to stick with the same one, but Tammy, you should have plenty of time to work through your questions kind of systematically on this one. So it's one question at a time. But thanks for that question. Anything else relating to that? Okay, as always, once I've gone through the lecture this morning and we've wrapped up the class, everybody, I'll hang around if anybody has any other questions. 2 other quick bits of housekeeping I'd like to just mention here. Please, if you can, I would really appreciate it if you did your spot evaluations, the course evaluations that you get to do online. I always look at those to see where we can improve, get a feel for what you think is going well, what you think has been a bit tricky. Obviously it's been a little different these last 2 semesters with the online environment, but I would really appreciate you doing those spot scores, filling them out. I really look at them as as chair of the department. I look at the evaluations of all the faculty. We sit down collectively and talk about them, and then look at what we're doing well and what we need to do differently. They're totally anonymous. They come to us well after the grades have been posted. So that was that. The other thing, this relates to people who are not graduating, people who will be here in 2022. I'm really hopeful. I think we're all hopeful that our international programming will be back on track, and that we will be able to go to South Africa on the Rhino program and to Costa Rica on the Rainforest Ecology Sustainable Development programs. So I just wanted to throw those out there and mention those two study abroad programs. I have several students who do both of them. And the reason why I just want to mention it, and I know this is down the line here, everyone, is that if study abroad gets back on track, and we're all hoping that that's going to be the case, we actually have some, both at the university level and at the departmental level, we have some really good financial aid available for students who would like to go on these programs. So at the first level, don't let the cost of those international study abroad programs put you off from applying. My own plug is I'm looking for really engaged students who are interested in these issues, and I do my level best to try and help students go on these two programs financially. It's very important to me when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion at TCU and the strides that we're trying to make. To me, that is a very broad definition that includes socioeconomic background, whatever your personal circumstances. I like spending time with wealthy people in warm climates, raising money so that we can help students go on cool experiences. So that's just my plug for that. So let me see if there are any questions on that before we finally wrap the course up here with some sort of formal closure. Anybody got any questions on that, on those issues? All good. All right. Okay. So as my Texas wife says, finally, we are here. We are at the final lecture. So, so how do I want to wrap this up, right? What do I want to, what are my sort of parting thoughts and comments to you as we bring contemporary environmental issues to a close? So let's go back to where we started, right? We started with this map, and I start the book with this map of looking at our planet at night, a composite image of consumption, of production, of electricity, of human impact on the planet, right? And I started this entire course with this question, right? Are humans the primary driver of environmental change? Not the only driver, but the primary driver, okay? What evidence do we have that suggests that we are dramatically changing the face of the planet, functioning of the ecosystems, and bearing in mind, everyone, that it's not just all doom and gloom, but bearing in mind that we have made tremendous strides in improving some of these indices of degradation that we've talked about, right? Whether they be technological or not. So we started framing this whole course from the standpoint of what I called, or not my term, but what scientists call the Great Acceleration, right? So remember these diagrams, the ramping up of a whole range of human indices with population in the top left and a whole bunch of other ones, right? Production and consumption type indices, whether it's water use, fertilizer consumption, primary energy use, GDP, and so on, right? This tremendous ramping up during the 20th century. The 20th century is the century of change, right? It's the century where development is fueled quite literally by fossil fuels, right? We would not, I think, have experienced the kind of development and in many ways improvement in the quality of life without the use of fossil fuels. But the flip side of that is the environmental impact of all of that, not just fossil fuels, but the environmental impact of the significant ramping up of the global development index, if you like, right? So we've looked at all of these issues. We've talked about stratospheric ozone, carbon dioxide, surface temperature, tropical forest loss. We didn't say much about ocean acidification. And actually, when I was thinking about this week, it made me realize that the next iteration of the book, I need to pay more attention to the oceans and more attention to waste disposal, which is just simply my oversight. But the point is that we've moved out of World War II, and we've gone through now 70-something years of tremendous development. And I think, probably without much argument, tremendous development and impact on the landscape. And so, the question here is now what, right? How do we navigate this century, and not to lay some sort of heavy burden on you, but I mean, this is it, right? You folks, the young generation, the generation that are now graduating from college, the old gray people like me and my predecessors have left quite a legacy, I think, on the planet, right? Both good and bad, and some indifferent. But we face a series, I think, of really enormous challenges. But coupled with that, the promise of human ingenuity, right? For goodness sake, we've got drones flying on Mars at the moment. I mean, that's just extraordinary in what is essentially 110 years since people first escaped gravity and flew for those few short yards on the beaches of North Carolina, right? So human ingenuity is absolutely extraordinary, innovation, technology. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that everything is open to techno fixes, right? But that gives me enormous hope. But yeah, we've left a tremendous impact on the planet, and it's up to us collectively to I think help to mitigate that. So some of the things we've looked at very briefly, some of the issues that we've looked at. One theme that I think was pretty common to a number of the individual topics we talked about was the disparity between the rich and poor, the haves and the have-nots, right? Now, as I made the comment before, and we talked about this very early on, okay, one of the key things I think that we have to strive for, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we know that the planet will be much better off, is to bring people out of poverty, right? And we're seeing that. We're seeing millions of people moving out of poverty and getting into those middle classes and beginning to strive towards and rightfully so enjoy a life, maybe not a life like we lead with the luxuries and the consumptive lifestyle that we have, which I'll talk about right at the end, but at least bringing humanity out of poverty. But the reality is there's still this enormous gap, right, between people living in wealthy condominiums and luxury apartments and houses and people who are not, right? And so that is an important theme, and this notion of environmental justice, who gets to carry the burden of what we've left on the planet. One of the other themes, right, was this, and it's inherent in that first slide of looking at the Earth at night, is the enormous impact we've had on our terrestrial surface and the appropriation of land for agriculture. Okay, and that has had a series of knock-on effects, right, in terms of water quality and soil degradation, and biodiversity and deforestation, the biological resources that we touched upon at the end. The impact that we've had searching for energy, right? Yeah, fossil fuels have been terrific in terms of fueling the Industrial Revolution and dramatically impacting development and economic growth and prosperity. But again, there's a downside to that, right? Every one of these sources of energy that we've talked about comes at a price, comes at a cost to the environment that we have to think about and manage, right? And of course, our water resources that we just ended off with. Okay, this is the Hoover Dam and the famous bathtub ring around the Hoover Dam. And as populations grow and cities become larger, more and more people moving towards the city, that increases the stress on things like water supply, right? So all of these things are critical. They're all interconnected. they're all, not all of them are what we call wicked problems. And what I mean by a wicked problem is something that is not open to simple, elegant solutions, right? Climate change is a wicked problem. Okay, it's a multi-layered, multi-complex problem, as is access to clean water. So a lot of these environmental issues and these environmental problems are very, very difficult, complicated, wicked problems to solve. And it's going to be up to smart, bright people like yourselves, I hope, to get involved to think about that. The growth in population in the 20th century has been enormously problematic, but, and I think I made this point when we talked about chapter 2, we're seeing significant progress. So this is a very simple model called the demographic transition model. And I like to put this at the end of the course and at the end of the chapters, because I think it gives us a framework, I hope, to think about how to move forward. So the demographic model was put out many decades ago, looking at how societies develop and grow through time. So let's just look at the blue line for a second here. This shows total population of a society. You can look at this as a society, a region, a continent, or the entire globe, right? And what you have early on in pre-industrial societies, rural societies, are high birth and death rates, right? So traditionally having large families to look after the family farm, you've got high infant mortality, the things we talked about in chapter 2, right? Of undeveloped countries, where you've got high birth and death rates. And then what happens as a country or a region moves through its developmental sequencing, the first thing that falls are the death rates, right? So health and human services come in, we start improving environmental quality, we get access to clean water, waterborne disease is eradicated, malaria is eradicated, whatever the particular drivers are. As a society begins to develop, death rates decline, but birth rates actually remain high because it takes there's a lag time. It takes a period of time before the declining birth rates begin to manifest. So what happens in this phase is that populations begin to grow dramatically, right? And we've seen that with our species, humanity, over time. As death rates have begun to fall throughout the 20th century and birth rates in many parts of the world have remained high, and we've expressed that in terms of total fertility rate, right? So total fertility rates on the region of, 5 to 6 children per couple meant that 20th century population saw this dramatic rise from, 2 billion people to where we are now, 7.8 billion people. But then we move through full development, birth rates begin to decline for all the reasons that we've talked about, and populations begin to stabilize, okay? And so the question is, as I posed right at the outset, everyone, where are we along this blue curve? Well, all indications are that we are somewhere here, right? If we put 7.8 billion people there, and at the end of the century, we're going to be at something like, 10.5 to 10.9 billion, somewhere in there. At some point, the indications are that global populations will begin to stabilize, right? The key question for all of us is, when that happens, what will the planet look like? What will the resilience of our climate, our water resources, our biodiversity systems look like as we move along that developmental sequence, right? In other words, between here at 7.8 and here at 10.9, okay? How much environmental degradation will we do, and how much can we avoid along that sequence? How many species will we lose along the way? How many tropical forests will we lose along the way as our population keeps marching towards 10.9 billion people? Does that make sense to everybody? That's the demographic transition. And as I've said before, and I've just captured this as a screenshot from Gapminder that we talked about, right? This was one where we looked at life expectancy and income per person, and I've put some slightly different countries on here. I've added Botswana as an example, right? When you look at how countries have evolved and are evolving, over time, what are we looking at here? We're looking at countries that are relatively poor with low life expectancies, okay? And almost all the countries in the world are marching up towards the top right-hand side of this curve, i.e. they're getting richer and they're getting healthier, right? We're living longer and we're getting wealthier, right? And that's enormously good news, right? I don't think anyone would argue, you know what, guys, we need to actually go back down towards this direction to save the planet. We need to get poorer and live shorter lives. I mean, no one would argue that, right? Either ethically or even sensibly. So that's the good news, right? The planet is, we are getting healthier and we are getting wealthier. Again, the question is, how much damage are we going to do and along the way? Any comments or thoughts on that? Any questions on that before I end off with circling back to ecological footprinting? Makes sense. All right. So where are we as a planet, as a society? Okay. Now, I know you did this in your lab, right? You looked at ecological footprinting in lab. So this is where I'm going to end. Right? I'm going to end as where are we as a planet and where are we likely to head? So remember, with footprinting, this is not the be all and end all. I'm not ending up here in this course on ecological footprinting to insinuate that it is by far and away the best ways to look at human impact, because like any academic exercise, it's flawed. But I think it gives us a really interesting way to contextualize human impact on planet, right? So remember, we can look at this a couple of ways, right? There is what we call biocapacity, right? So biocapacity is how many biologically active, resourceful hectares or acres there are on the planet, right? So in other words, if you're living in Brazil, for example, and you've got rich biological resources, tropical rainforest, rich fishing grounds, and so on, you've got a high biocapacity, right? The biocapacity of a place like Brazil is vastly different to the biocapacity of Saudi Arabia, right? Fishing grounds, very little, forests, almost essentially none, right? So you've got the biological capacity of a particular region versus the ecological footprint, right? How much do we use and consume? And a lot of that is carbon footprint, not just in the use of fossil fuels, but how we produce our food, how we transport our food, how we use electricity and energy and so on, right? And the difference between the two tell you, and it's expressed here, in terms of the number of Earths that it basically takes to support our lifestyle. So this is one way to look at the ecological footprint for the planet, okay? And you can see that according to ecological footprinting, the estimates here are that somewhere in the late 1960s, as a whole, as a planet, we started exceeding the biocapacity of the Earth. Now, that doesn't mean to say that the Earth is just suddenly heading into extinction and doom and gloom, right? What it means is that we are, in a sense, living off borrowed time, right? We are living off the biocapacity and we are using our resources and impacting our planet in the long term in an unsustainable way, right? Everything above this curve is by definition what we would think of as being unsustainable. That doesn't mean to say it cannot be reversed, right? It's like buying a house, okay? Unless you're lucky enough where you've got, say, $300,000 sitting in the bank and you just go and buy your house cash, what do, right? You borrow that money from the bank and you pay that loan back over time. In a sense, that's what I'm trying to get at here, right? Is that we are borrowing our resources at a rate that will potentially impact future generations, right? So that's one way to look at human impact on the planet. And when we look at ecological impacts in terms of footprinting, this is the latest data that the ecological footprint site has. These are the highest ecological footprints in the world, right? So we currently estimate that the current biocapacity is this solid dashed line here, which is about 1.8 hectares per person per year, right? That's the globally productive land and oceanic resources that we have. So 1.8 global hectares is an estimate of what it takes to support our lifestyle. Anything above that means that the ecological footprint vastly outstrips the biocapacity. And these are the top 10 in the world, right? And then down here, I've got the world. So this is basically the previous diagram where this little bit, we're living above, that's the 1.6 Earths, right? So we're living above the biocapacity. And then we've also broken this out into high income, middle income, and low income countries, right? So what do you notice about this diagram? What strikes you as potentially interesting or maybe even strange about this diagram in terms of the highest ecological footprints in the world? And you can see I've highlighted them here, right, on this map. Why does Qatar, for example, have the world's highest ecological footprint? Do you think?
Fossil fuels burning.
Okay.
I know they do a lot of like oil and gas over there.
Right, so oil and gas extraction, mining, right? Carbon footprints, where do they get their food from? Okay, Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, they're not known for their vast agricultural production, right? They import almost everything, food, water, resources, right? They have a very high impact on the environment. These are 4 countries that I've referred to a few times in this course. Let's just look at this, right? This shows, and I'm expressing this again in terms of the ecological footprint versus the biocapacity. So this is not the number of Earths. This is just looking at the biocapacity versus the footprint. So you look at the bottom right here, right? And you look at Brazil. Brazil is still in good shape because it is in what is called an ecological reserve, meaning its biocapacity is still much higher than its ecological footprint. But that biocapacity is declining, right? So deforestation in Brazil and cattle grazing that's wiping out large areas of the Brazilian savanna means their biocapacity is decreasing. Their fishing stocks are decreasing. But the other 3 countries that I've referred to several times, right? Obviously us, China, and India, 3 countries that are critical in terms of long-term sustainability. You can see in terms of the US, this is kind of an interesting trend, right? Our ecological footprint has actually been going down over the last 20 years, right? Part of that is because our CO2 emissions are actually going down. We're becoming much more efficient in terms of our use of energy, electricity, and so on, okay? But China, this one here, driven largely by coal and the development of China, and India that continues to expand, their biocapacity, the difference between the biocapacity and their ecological footprint is getting larger and larger. In other words, their ecological deficit is getting greater, okay? And so they've got some really significant challenges ahead. Here's another one. Here's one of my favorite countries in the world, right? Costa Rica, over time. This Costa Rica wants to become the first carbon neutral country in the world, okay? And as their forests had declined all the way through to, you know, the 2000s, they are now starting to turn the curve and work their way back. They're still in an ecological deficit. And part of that is because even though they get 90% of their electricity from renewable resources like wind and solar and geothermal, they're a growing country. Their population is growing quite quickly. And they still use, you know, older technology, diesel and gas burning cars. That adds to their ecological footprint, right? So countries around the world are facing this challenge on how to continue to develop, how to continue to grow, how to continue to provide for their citizens, but at the same time not completely mess things up along the way. And so, you know, as I said at the outset, everybody, I hope I have not come across as preachy in this course, because I have to look at my own ecological impact and my own ecological footprint, right? This is mine, okay? This is the last time I did this, so that was over the summer, right? It takes 4.8 Earths to support my lifestyle, okay? So, you know, how can I sit here and lecture at you about reducing your carbon footprint? Now, for this year, that's going to be significantly lower because a large part of my personal footprint is travel, okay, is air travel. I travel around the world. I like to travel. I like to see my family. It's part of my job. I like to go around the world and give talks and lecture. I travel over 100 hours a year in an airplane. I do on average about 120 to 150,000 miles a year of air travel. That significantly ramps up my carbon footprint, right? So I can control that. Can I? I can choose not to travel and not to fly, but the airplane is probably still going to fly. So is that a cop-out? I don't know, right? Where I get my food from, right? So you can see mobility is a large one of my footprint, and that's airline travel. I just live down on West 7th Street, so I don't drive very far, okay? But my food is a big part of my my footprint, where I get my food from, right? So I don't get my food from a community garden. I generally go to Central Market or to Tom Thumb, right? So my point here, everybody, is don't get too depressed about what your own ecological footprint is. Okay, it's not that it's good or bad, it just is what it is. I think the key is, how do we manage that, right? How do we think about reducing our consumption as we move forward? So finally, let me end with this. And what I'll do is I'll end, and then again, I'm going to hang around and take questions as we end up. So I'm just going to leave you with three things here, right? One is, think about what your worldview was when you came into this class from an environmental perspective, right? What was that when you joined this class? What was your worldview, and what is it now? Has it changed, right? Has anything that we've covered in this class changed or given you pause for thought? To begin to think about how you manage your lifestyle, how you go about it on a day-to-day basis. And if it has, how has it changed, right? Has it improved? Has it not? Has it gotten worse, right? Are you more positive about the future? Are you less so, right? So that's kind of just a closing thought on this class. I also wanted to say, as my final thought, I really have actually appreciated the way that all of you have conducted yourself in this class, right? I had asked you at the beginning of this course to, as we engage in these conversations, and I know it's been quite hard to really get to know you and engage with you on a one-to-one basis when there's 100+ people on a Zoom call. I know that's not the same as a lecture hall, but I actually have really appreciated the civility, if you like, of the way in which these conversations and questions have been handled. So I've really appreciated that. So that's it. I hope you have a successful end to the semester, that your exams go well, and for those who are graduating, wish you nothing but the best. And just think about your impact on the planet. As I like to say, vote with your wallet. And vote smartly. So I appreciate that. Thanks, everybody. It's been great to get to know you as best as I can. And I will hang around now and answer questions or any logistical things you have along the way.
Thank you, Dr. Slattery.
You bet.
Thank you,
folks.
Dr. Slattery.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Slattery. I just have a question.
Yeah.
At least, like, broadly speaking, can you talk about the carbon cycle again? Like what I don't. It's kind of a lot to like put down like as an answer or a question.
Yeah. So the carbon cycle. I just want you to appreciate that when you look at that diagram of the carbon cycle, not all the individual percentages, but to understand a couple of very basic things. One, that that through the combustion of fossil fuels, we're adding about 9.5 billion tons of carbon to the atmosphere every year, and that has continued to go up. That we're adding about another 1.6 billion tons through deforestation. So it's combustion of fossil fuels and deforestation that are adding this 10.5 to 11 billion tons to the atmosphere every year. That's the very basics. The second part is how you convert between carbon and carbon dioxide, but not the details of exactly how many tons are recycled between the oceans and things like that. Yeah, does that help?
Yes, I was like, carbon cycle. That's a lot to.
Yeah, carbon cycle for 100 points. Discuss. That would
yes.
Get you going. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Cool.
So when you said discuss carbon versus carbon dioxide, would that be part of the carbon cycle?
Yeah, it is. You can. If I was to say just discuss the carbon cycle and how humans impacted, that wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to necessarily address that, Sunny. If I was to ask you, if you're emitting 1 ton of carbon, what would that be equivalent to in carbon dioxide? And that I would expect you to know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but
Hi, Professor. I'm a graduating senior, and I think
Okay.
I might have missed. I might come on late one time when you were talking about what to do about rescheduling the final.
yeah, I haven't heard from you, or did I hear from you and I didn't?
No, I don't think I've reached out yet.
Okay, so it seems like you're about to reach out. Let me get
Yes.
you in my, give me 1 second, because I was going to actually email everyone here. Let me just put you in my spreadsheet here. All right, so when are we going to do it? Well,
I'd be open to Monday at 9:30.
Monday, 9:30 a.m., and that's Monday, 5/3/2021. All right, you are in and good to go. If it won't show
Awesome.
up yet, I'll have to get into the website later this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed this course, and it's been a blast.
Cool, excellent. What are you going on to do?
I'm working in consulting, like technology consulting.
Nice. Here in Texas, or are you heading somewhere else?
Yeah, in Dallas.
Awesome. Well,
Mhm.
I mean, it is Dallas, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, all the very best.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Bet.
I just had one more quick question about the final. My internet cut out, and I don't know if you addressed, like, do we just log into Zoom and then will the quiz open, or?
Yeah,
On our-
so I'll send an email out. Yeah, it'll just be normal. So at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, Sally, you log on to your PC online and it'll open automatically then.
Okay, thank you. And do
Mhm.
we still log in with you? Like,
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, you know what? Let me probably. I'll
Okay.
probably.
thank you.
Yeah, I'll set up a Zoom link. I need to make.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Slattery?
Yeah.
For the non-senior, we will log into Zoom on 11 a.m. on Thursday,
Say again.
right? For the non-senior, we will log in to Zoom at 11 a.m.
As normal, 11
Thursday.
a.m. on Thursday. It'll just be as normal.
And we will have like until 12:30,
Correct.
and then we will be finished.
Correct.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a
You
good
bet.
one.
Yeah, you too.